Now let's hear from one of my favorite journalists. Tunku Varadarajan is a contributor to the Wall Street Journal. I've read him for years. He's a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. I don't know, a month or so ago, he had this interview on a Saturday in the Journal with Bibi Netanyahu. But then on Saturday of this past week, he had an amazing piece in the Journal again, because he visited only days ago, really, a kibbutz that was profoundly affected by the attacks on Israel from the terrorists in Hamas. So thanks for being with us, Tunku. It was a powerful piece, and we want to hear more about what you saw and how you put it together.
Thanks, Dennis. Thank you for having me. It was a harrowing visit. I was taken there. I was in Jerusalem as part of a 2-week visit to Israel that I had done for the Journal. The primary purpose of which was to interview Prime Minister Netanyahu. But having, I could very well have interviewed him and taken the next flight home. But having gone all that way, I did want to see with my own eyes at least one of the kibbutzes that had been, or kibbutzim as we should start saying, that had been attacked and laid waste to by Hamas. We're not unfamiliar with the story. We've seen footage on television. We've seen various other sources on our YouTube channels, and we've seen pictures in various websites. So we know what happened. We've seen and read and heard all the horrors and atrocities, but until you actually see the place with your own eyes, you don't actually get a sense of the cruelty and the violation that took place. And I spent a few hours at this kibbutz called Nir Oz, which is a mile and a half from Gaza. You can actually see Gaza from the edge of the kibbutz, and we stood on a kind of lookout where kibbutzniks used to go back in the day, pre-October 7, for picnics. And you looked at Gaza, and you saw a chill goes down your spine when you see how close it is, and you realize how easy it must have been in all these years for an attack like this to have occurred. But it just happened to have happened on that day. And as I was there, there were planes, Israeli jets flying overhead. There was the sort of boom, boom, boom of artillery guns firing. You could hear the war. And so you could hear a war occurring, and then as you heard the war taking place, you walked in the kibbutz that had been destroyed on October the 7th. And I don't use the word destroyed lightly. It was literally, savaged, pillaged, burned, and people.
I believe you said the kibbutz had 150 homes and that at least 100 of them were basically destroyed by the terrorists.
I'm not sure how many were destroyed in a kind of irreparable state, but only I think the point I made in the piece was that only 4 of them were untouched or undamaged by the terrorists. So the rest of the homes, just 4. The rest of the homes were either destroyed or damaged in some way. So we're talking about pretty considerable destruction in a kibbutz that was 400 people strong.
If I may, Tunku, I'd like to mention 2 moments in the story that just rattled me, jarred me in your story in the Journal. And one was the mother you talked to, where for something like 8 hours, these Hamas thugs were trying to break into their safe room, get through the barrier, setting fire to the house. And the woman tells you that her 11-year-old daughter basically screamed to her mom, just open the door and let them shoot me and kill me. I don't want to burn to death. Your 11-year-old daughter saying a thing like that. And then the other thing was they end up hearing, because I'd heard this and no one's really talked about it much in the mainstream media, that it wasn't just the 1,000 or so or 1,500 terrorists of Hamas who went in there to do the killing, that afterward, thousands of Palestinians who lived in Gaza right on the border there went across and went into the homes of these victims and stole from them. And your people that you interviewed hear these regular residents of Gaza, Palestinians, going in and taking food out of their fridge and taking furniture. Tell us more.
Yeah, you're quite right. I'm not sure of the numbers of people, but after the first waves over 8 hours. The attacks, the assault on this particular kibbutz lasted about 8 hours. And then after the first waves of attacks, which were conducted by armed young men, terrorists who belonged to Hamas, um, there were lulls. And then in the course of which other people came over from Gaza, uh, whom we have to presume to be civilians. And this lady I spoke to called Amit Simantov and her friend called Mor Zarafati, they happened to live in adjacent houses. They were best friends from childhood and they actually lived with their families side by side. And they were both barricaded with their families in their respective safe rooms, or mamad as it's called in Hebrew. And Amit Simantov, one of them, told me that as they were barricaded in the safe room, after a few hours of enduring the Hamas attacks, they could hear what were clearly and indisputably the voices of women and children, who obviously could not have been Hamas terrorists by definition, or at least not conventional Hamas terrorists. There were women and children, and they were speaking in Arabic, and they were the sounds of people who were helping themselves to things, making themselves at home, making off with things. She spoke of how her fridge was opened and people were taking things out of the fridge. So the impression that they came away with from all of this, an impression that other people who were hiding in their safe rooms also had, was that it wasn't just the terrorists who came and ruined the place. It was also civilians who came in their wake, camp followers, if you will. The next wave, they came in the wake of the terrorists to see what
Right.
they could do, to see what they could take. And they didn't just take food from the fridge. They took hostages. So it wasn't just the armed men who took hostages. It was often civilians who took them.
That's shocking. And I don't know that that's been reported. I may have missed that. What do you
No,
think? Has that been
it,
in the media?
it has been in the media.
Okay. All right. Good. Good.
Yeah,
Well, tell us more.
they assisted it was a free for all. They were taking stuff of value, and that included shoes, it included food, it included clothes, it included gadgets, and it also included people. Um,
And people told you in your article that, gee, we were living peacefully. We were hiring Palestinians to come into our homes and do work. I mean, and then they were shocked that the regular townsfolk would also partake in this.
well, they had workers from Gaza. There are only 400 people living on the kibbutz. Not all of them are able-bodied adults who can farm and do stuff. Plenty of kids, so they need assistance. They need workers, and they had workers who came from Gaza to help on the farmland, to help in construction, for which they were compensated. I don't know how well they were paid, but they were certainly paid well enough for the Gazans to want to come and do this. Um, and um, and what they concluded, the kibbutzniks who survived, was based on evidence that they found on the bodies of slain terrorists, such as hand-drawn maps, which provided very intimate detail of the kibbutz, where the head of security lived, where the waterworks were, where the electrical mains were. These details to that degree of kind of sophistication and minuteness that they couldn't help but concluding that these details could not have come from anyone but the Gazans who had come to work with them
Who
over
were
months.
trusted. And if you're an Israeli now, Tunku, you've got to be thinking, my gosh, it turns out all along they hated us. All along they were just waiting for an opportunity to hurt us.
Yeah, they said, the two ladies I spoke to, who, by the way, I mean, it was their fifth visit to the kibbutz since the day of the attack. And so, I did ask them. I said, you ladies seem remarkably composed for where you are and what you went through here. And they said, well, it's our fifth visit, and that's why. But, when we came here for the first couple of times, we just were shaking like leaves and we couldn't control ourselves. And so they're now hardened by time, and they're also hardened by their determination to tell people what happened here. So one of the things they told me was really quite sobering, which is that they once lived in a relationship of relative trust with the Gazans. They had them come and work for them. They said to me that Gazan workers worked. One of them said to me the Gazan workers worked on the farm and worked with their father. He would have them into their house for coffee. It was a relationship of trust. They spoke about how Gazan workers would joke with the kibbutzniks when they helped construct houses. The Gazans would say, I'm really building this for myself. Ha ha ha. And then
Because one day we're going to be taking you over, in essence.
that was the joke, and
A little bit of gallows humor there.
it was delivered as a joke, and it was received as a joke by the kibbutzniks, and there were smiles all around as they sipped coffee and bantered. Um, Telling that joke now after October 7 gives it that dark hue, and obviously makes us realize that behind that humor was some bitterness. And of course, the Gazans, there's no denying that the Gazans are a bitter people, and they don't and have never, I think, entirely reconciled themselves to the fact that these kibbutzes exist next to them. And if they came to work in the kibbutzes, they came to work obviously for compensation and money that they needed, but maybe they came to work for other reasons. Maybe they came to work to play the long game, to build trust, find out as much as they could over time, and then, but one also has to ask whether the information that Hamas got from these Gazan workers was freely divulged, or was it given under duress? I mean, we will never know the
Right.
answer. Could Hamas have said,
do you dare turn down a request for information? Do you dare tell them no? This is a murderous thug terrorist organization.
Exactly. So there's that question, which, one has to consider. Against that, one has evidence of the fact that ordinary Gazans strolled over and helped themselves to stuff. So if everything was done under duress and that this was a purely Hamas exercise, and Hamas were at odds with the public opinion in Gaza, which was pacific and unwilling to be unkind to the Jews who live next to them, you wouldn't perhaps have had such a flood of civilians come over and react with such opportunistic kind of thievery as they did, and glee also, and celebration. So it's not black and white, but I think it's really kind of not as, I think we shouldn't have any illusions about the way Gazans think of their Jewish neighbors. The illusion, there were plenty of illusions on the Jewish side. As I said, they had some element of trust. They liked to believe the best of the Gazans. I guess it was an illusion that they cultivated because it just made living there easier, to think
Yes.
the best of your neighbors rather than to think that they're out to kill you all the time.
And as you put it on your article, given how some of these people feel, given that we thought these Gaza neighbors, Palestinians, were our friends, when it turns out that many of them hated us all along, we're just waiting. My gosh, what does this mean for the possibility of moving forward with some kind of negotiations or a two-state solution? I mean, how can anyone who's Israeli ever trust the other side to negotiate at all at this point?
Yeah. Yeah, no, the thing I found in my 2 week stay in Israel, and I'm not, let me tell your listeners, I'm not an Israel expert. This is my first visit to Israel since 1994.
Wow.
So everything I saw and reported on and wrote about was based on meetings that I had and stuff that I learned on this trip.
Yeah.
I'm not a complete ignoramus about Israel. I have 30 years of international affairs analysis and reporting under my belt, but I'm not an Israel expert. But I did. This was a trip based on a visit, based on meetings, based on eyewitness accounts of what I saw. And the one thing that I came away with, having learned, was that no Israelis, no serious Israelis, politicians or even civilians, on the right and on the left, wants to talk about. No serious Israeli wants to talk about a two-state solution right now. This is not the time for it. This is not the time to talk about a solution that is based on according statehood to the people who killed 14 or 1,500 people and then took nearly 200 hostages. It's not the time. It's a bad idea. It's inappropriate. It's obscene, which is why this insistence that we see from the State Department, from Mr. Blinken and others, that the two-state solution be put on the table is not just, I guess the kindest thing one can say about that is that it's tone deaf. But I'd like to be a little more unkind and say, or just frank and blunt and say it's idiotic. It's just it doesn't it is treating the Israelis almost with contempt. It's like saying that, okay, yeah, I get it. They killed 1,500 of you, but you still got to talk to them. Uh,
Yeah.
which
I
may
didn't
well
see anyone telling us that, in the weeks after 9/11.
precisely. Imagine if the world had said, "You guys have got to sit down with Osama bin Laden.
Yeah.
Okay, you got to work things out. Have a powwow, have a drink, see what
Right.
you can do, see where you can."
No one was calling for a ceasefire then.
No,
But Israel does it, and suddenly the entire world is up in arms. And while Biden said some very nice things in the opening weeks after, I think a lot of people always suspected that his support was feeble. And at some point, okay, now we've had enough. Enough. You guys have gone too far.
yeah, and I think Israel is always held to a higher standard than any other country in the world. It's expected to be kinder to its enemies. It's expected to be smarter than it's expected to have foolproof intelligence. It's expected to have an invincible army. But most of all, it's expected to endure um, attacks and then respond with a kind of magnanimous forgiveness of its attackers that no nation would ask of itself. And yet no one hesitates to ask the same of Israel. They expect Israelis to be um, somehow kinder, gentler, more forgiving, more absorptive of pain than anyone else on earth. And the Israelis say, hang on a minute, this is our war. These are our people. And we will fight it on our terms. Don't tell us what to do because these are bad things that are happening to us, not to you. So you can't tell us to be nicer than we find ourselves able to be right now.
Right. And how dare you, furthermore? And Tunku, as you said that, which was eloquent, I just want my listeners out there to know that this beautiful beam of golden sunlight came in from Tunku's left and just bathed him in gorgeous, beautiful sunlight, as if God himself was coming to say, hey, man, what he said. I hope we can manage to get that out there on video because people ought to see this. Well, as we get ready for kind of coming around to an end to this conversation, which I've enjoyed, and I thank you so much. Do you have any predictions or any thoughts on what happens next or what should happen next?
Well, no, I mean, there are all kinds of possibilities that people put forward. I think most of Israel is agreed that they don't want to see um, Gaza return to full Israeli control and responsibility,
Right.
uh, because that would just insert the IDF and the Israeli government right into the middle of the quagmire. I think the bottom line is everyone is agreed on right and on. I think the thing that Americans need to understand is that um, even as there are seemingly irreconcilable differences in this country, in America, between right and left, um, in Israel, right and left agree on plenty. They disagree on plenty too. The left cannot stand Netanyahu, and anything. If Netanyahu said, the sun rises in the east, the left would accuse him of lying. So there's that kind of unbelievable refusal. It's a lot of Israelis have Netanyahu derangement syndrome. Um, but the one thing that Israelis of the left and of the right are in agreement on is that Hamas must be destroyed. Um, there's no, you even the far left in Israel believes that nothing if the one non-negotiable thing Israel has to do after October 7 is to get rid of Hamas forever, to the extent that it can, to
Yes.
eradicate it. And as Netanyahu said in his interview with me, the two non-negotiable conditions of any post-war a solution to Gaza would be complete de-radicalization and complete demilitarization. So demilitarization is probably more easily done than de-radicalization, because you can take people's weapons away, but you can't take ideas out of people's heads
Right. And then
away.
those ideas have been preached for 20 or 30 years or more.
Right, and it's taught to young Gazan children in schools, and these schools are run by an affiliate of the United Nations, and so it's hard to de-radicalization will take a lifetime, and
Yes.
if it is to succeed at all, but
Well,
demilitarization is non-negotiable.
yes. Well, interesting point you make, because Elon Musk, I'm writing a book on Elon currently on lessons we can learn from Elon. What would Elon do? And he has a saying, he likes to say that the most likely outcome turns out to be the ironic one. And here Hamas was hoping to destroy Israel, hurt it as much as possible. And it attacked the citizens of a divided country. And by doing that, the ironic outcome is the opposite. Israel is not destroyed. Israel, on this point at least, has been united.
Yeah, exactly. I think Hamas has united Israel in a way that it was not before October 7. It was probably more divided than it has been at any time in its history over the question of judicial reform. I mean, the other irony, of course, apart from the uniting of a country that had been divided, is the fact that the people they attacked in these kibbutzes were some of the Israelis most inclined to make peace with the Palestinians. And so they've turned these peacenik, peacenik kibbutzniks into hardline rejectionists of the two-state solution. So they basically attacked their some of their finest allies within the Israeli population and have turned them into their most implacable foes.
Wow. I haven't heard that point made anywhere, and I'm so happy you made it here on What's Bugging Me. Tunku, it's so good of you to spend time to come on the podcast. I thank you so much. I've wanted to meet you for years, and now I feel like I have.
Well, it's a pleasure to meet you, and then I we follow each other on Twitter, and I enjoy your analyses and your comments, and so let's do this again if you
I'd
can
love it, man.
you can
I
put up
would.
with me again.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful weekend. Okay.
You too, sir.
All right.